The morning sun peeked through the tall windows of Hartwell Engineering as Miguel Alvarez pushed his cleaning cart down the long hallway. The wheels squeaked slightly. He'd been meaning to oil them for weeks now. The sound had become so familiar that most employees didn't even notice it anymore, just like they didn't notice Miguel himself. For almost 15 years, Miguel had been the main janitor at this fancy car engineering company. Every single day, he showed up at 6 a.m. sharp, put on his gray uniform with the company logo, and got to work. He swept the floors until they shined. He emptied every trash bin before it got full. He made sure the bathrooms were spotless, and he did it all with a quiet pride that nobody seemed to see. The fancy engineers in their clean white coats walked past him like he was invisible. Sometimes they'd nod if they happened to make eye contact, but most times they just hurried by too, busy with their important work to notice the man who kept their workspace clean. Miguel didn't mind much. He understood busy people. Still, after 15 years, it would have been nice to hear more than just the occasional thanks mumbled as someone rushed past. What none of these smart engineers knew was that Miguel hadn't always been a janitor. Back in his home country, he'd been somebody important. For 20 years, he had worked as one of the best car mechanics in his city. He could take apart an engine and put it back together with his eyes closed. People from towns away would bring their cars to his shop because they knew he could fix problems no one else could solve. He even had his own garage with 5 workers who looked up to him. But then everything fell apart. His country's government changed suddenly. Things got dangerous. Miguel had to make the hardest choice of his life. Leave everything behind to keep his family safe. He arrived in this new country with nothing but the clothes on his back and the knowledge in his head. His certificates and experience meant nothing here. He needed a job, any job, to support his wife and 2 children. That's how he ended up pushing a mop at Hartwell Engineering. Miguel was wiping down the water fountain near the main lab when he heard raised voices coming from inside. He didn't mean to listen in, but the glass walls didn't block much sound. The engineers sounded upset. 3 months of work, and this thing still won't run properly. A tall man with glasses and thinning hair was waving his arms around in frustration. Miguel recognized him as Dr. Westbrook, the head engineer. "We've tried everything. What about the fuel injection timing?" asked a younger engineer. "Checked it twice," snapped Dr. Westbrook. "The problem is deeper than that." Miguel couldn't help but glance at what they were working on. In the center of the lab sat the most beautiful engine he had ever seen. It was smaller than typical car engines, but looked more powerful. Tubes and wires connected it to several computers that displayed colorful graphs and numbers. This was the hydrogen-electric hybrid engine that everyone had been talking about for months. The secret project that was supposed to change the car industry forever. "If we don't fix this by the investor demonstration next week, we can kiss our funding goodbye," Dr. Westbrook said, his voice tired. "And probably our jobs, too." Miguel noticed something about the engine that made his fingers itch. From his angle, he could see a small component that didn't look quite right. In his old shop, he'd seen something similar happen with experimental fuel systems. It was probably nothing, but before he could think better of it, Miguel set down his cleaning supplies and stepped into the lab. 20 pairs of eyes turned to look at him. "Excuse me," he said, his accent thick but his words clear. "I think I might know what's wrong with your engine." The silence that followed lasted only 2 seconds before someone snickered. Then another person laughed. Soon half the room was chuckling. "Look, the janitor thinks he can fix our engine," someone called from the back. Dr. Westbrook held up his hand for quiet. He looked tired with dark circles under his eyes. "Thanks for your enthusiasm," he said to Miguel, not unkindly but with clear dismissal. "But this is cutting-edge technology. We need qualified engineers on this, not cleaning staff." He turned back to his team. "Let's take a break and meet again in an hour with fresh ideas." The engineers filed past Miguel, some still smiling at the joke. One young woman gave him an apologetic look, but she didn't say anything. "Please just finish cleaning the floors," Dr. Westbrook added over his shoulder as he left. Miguel picked up his mop and continued working, but his eyes kept drifting back to the engine. From where he stood, he could clearly see the problem now. The fuel injection system had a tiny misalignment, probably just a fraction of a millimeter off, but enough to cause big problems. And there was something else. The electrical timing mechanism looked slightly wrong too. In his mind, Miguel could already see exactly what needed to be done to fix it. Simple adjustments that would take someone with the right experience maybe an hour at most. But they'd never let the janitor touch their precious engine. As he cleaned around the lab, carefully staying away from the important equipment, Miguel noticed a calendar on the wall. Next Wednesday was circled in red with the words Investor, Demo, written in big letters. Below that, someone had scribbled Last Chance. He thought about his family, his wife Rosa, who worked double shifts at the hospital, his son who wanted to go to college next year, his daughter who needed braces. They depended on his steady job here. He couldn't risk getting fired for messing with expensive equipment. But as the day wore on and he heard more frustrated conversations from the engineering team, an idea began to form in his mind. Miguel had become friendly with Frank, the night security guard. Frank was a kind older man who always treated Miguel with respect, asking about his family, and sometimes sharing cookies his wife baked. Maybe, just maybe, Frank would give him a chance to look at that engine after everyone else had gone home. As Miguel emptied the last trash bins for the day, he made up his mind. Tonight, he would take a risk. Tonight, the janitor would become an engineer again. The clock on the wall ticked past 7:30 p.m. Most of the lights at Hartwell Engineering had gone dark. The last engineer had left about 20 minutes ago, muttering about coming in early tomorrow to tackle the engine problem again. Miguel finished, polishing the last window in the hallway, his mind racing with thoughts of what he was about to do. He pushed his cleaning cart into the supply closet and took a deep breath. The building was almost empty now. Only Frank, the night security guard, remained at his desk near the front entrance. Miguel had been thinking all day about how to approach him. Frank was a good man, fair and honest, but what Miguel wanted to do could get them both in trouble. Miguel straightened his uniform and walked to the security desk. Frank was reading a fishing magazine, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He looked up and smiled when he saw Miguel. "Heading home, Miguel? Your boy has that science test tomorrow, right? Did he study like you told him?" That was Frank, always remembering little details about people's lives. It made Miguel's plan even harder. Yes, he studied. Rosa is helping him right now. Miguel shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Frank, I need to ask you something." Frank must have heard the seriousness in Miguel's voice because he put down his magazine and gave him his full attention. "What's on your mind?" "I need 1 hour in the main lab, just 1 hour by myself." Miguel's words came out in a rush. "I know it's against the rules, but I think I can help with the engine problem they're having." Frank's bushy eyebrows shot up. "The hybrid engine? Miguel, that thing costs more than I'll make in my lifetime. If anything happens to it, I know what I'm doing, Frank. Before I came here, before I was a janitor, I was—" Miguel paused, the words sticking in his throat. He rarely talked about his past life. "I was an engineer too, a good one." Frank studied him for a long moment. His eyes, kind but sharp, seemed to be seeing Miguel for the first time. "I always wondered why you sometimes look at those machines like you understand them better than the folks in the white coats." Miguel waited, his heart pounding. Finally, Frank sighed. 1 hour, Miguel, not a minute more. I'll stay by the door. And if anyone comes, you're out of there immediately. And if you break anything, I won't," Miguel promised quickly. "And thank you, Frank. Thank you." The main lab felt different at night. The emergency lights cast a soft blue glow over the equipment. Without the usual bustle of engineers, the room seemed bigger, almost peaceful. The prototype engine sat in the center like a sleeping animal. Miguel hesitated at the doorway, suddenly nervous. It had been years since he'd worked on an engine, this sophisticated, but his hands remembered. They always remembered. He removed his gray janitor's uniform jacket, folding it carefully over a chair. Underneath, he wore a faded blue t-shirt, worn thin from too many washes. He rolled up his sleeves and approached the engine with the respect it deserved. "Let's see what's bothering you," he whispered, placing his hands gently on the cool metal surface. Miguel started by examining the parts he could see without taking anything apart. His fingers traced connections, his eyes noting the layout. This engine was revolutionary, a true blend of hydrogen fuel cell technology and advanced electric motor design. But beneath all the innovation, the basic principles remained the same. He found the access panel and carefully opened it using tools from the workbench nearby. The engineers had been so focused on the computer diagnostics that they'd missed something basic, something you could only find by feeling the components with your hands. "There you are," Miguel murmured, finding the first problem exactly where he thought it would be. The fuel injection system had a microscopic misalignment, not enough to show up in most tests, but enough to cause the efficiency problems they'd been seeing. Fixing it required steady hands and precise adjustments. Miguel worked slowly, methodically, the way he'd been taught by his mentor back home 30 years ago. "Respect the machine," his old teacher had always said. "Listen to what it's telling you." Once the fuel system was aligned properly, Miguel moved on to the electrical timing mechanism. Here the problem was more subtle, a slight flaw in how the electrical pulses synchronized with the fuel injection. It was no wonder the team had missed it. On paper, everything looked correct, but machines don't run on paper. Miguel needed a specific tool that wasn't on the workbench. He looked around, then smiled when he spotted a box of paper clips. With practiced movements, he straightened one out and bent it into the shape he needed. Sometimes the simplest tools worked best. The minutes ticked by as Miguel lost himself in the work. His body remembered a rhythm he thought he'd forgotten, the dance of hands and tools and metal that had once been his daily life. It felt good. "Right." Frank peeked in after 45 minutes. 15 minutes left, Miguel," he whispered. Miguel nodded without looking up. He was almost done. Just a few more adjustments and there. He could feel the difference. The engine, components now sat in perfect harmony with each other, ready to work together instead of fighting against one another. Carefully, he reassembled everything exactly as it had been. No one should be able to tell he'd touched it. He used a clean cloth to wipe away his fingerprints from the tools and the engine's surface. Then he stepped back and took one last look at his work. "You'll run beautifully tomorrow," he told the engine softly. "Show them what you can do." Miguel put on his uniform jacket and tidied the work area until it looked untouched. As he was about to leave, he noticed a small smudge on the floor where he'd been standing. He quickly grabbed a cloth from his pocket and wiped it clean. "Wainty," Frank peeked in again. Miguel was mopping the floor as if that's all he'd been doing. "Time's up," Frank said. Miguel nodded and pushed his mop toward the door. "Thank you, Frank. I'm finished now." As they walked out together, Frank asked, "Did you fix it?" Miguel allowed himself a small smile. "We'll find out tomorrow." The ride home on the late bus was quiet. Miguel sat by the window, watching the city, lights blur past. His hands still tingled from the work they'd done. They were janitor's hands now, rough from cleaning chemicals, nicked from fixing broken toilets and jammed doors. But tonight, they had remembered they were engineers' hands too. At home, his family would be asleep already. He would slip into bed beside his wife and she would mumble a sleepy hello without waking fully. Tomorrow he would make breakfast for the children before school, just like always. He would put on his gray uniform and go to work with his mop and his cart, but something would be different. Miguel smiled at his reflection in the bus window. Tomorrow he would watch the faces of the engineers when they turned on that engine. Miguel arrived at work early the next morning. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying every adjustment he'd made to the engine. Had he tightened everything properly? Would the paperclip tool he'd crafted hold up? Would anyone notice he'd touched it? These thoughts had chased each other around his head all night. He went through his morning routine with special care. The lobby floors were mopped until they gleamed. The trash cans were emptied, even the ones that were barely half full. He even cleaned the windows again, though he'd done them yesterday. By 8:30 a.m., the engineers began arriving. Miguel watched them from the corner of his eye as he dusted the picture frames in the hallway. They looked tired and frustrated, their conversations quiet and tense. None of them gave him a second glance as they headed toward the lab, coffee cups clutched in their hands like lifelines. Dr. Westbrook was the last to arrive. his face grim and determined. He carried a thick folder under his arm and walked with the heavy steps of someone carrying bad news. Miguel felt a pang of worry. What if his fixes weren't enough? What if he'd made things worse? "Morning, Jose," Dr. Westbrook said absently as he passed. He'd been calling Miguel by the wrong name for years, and Miguel had given up correcting him. "Good morning, doctor," Miguel replied, but the engineer was already through the lab door. Miguel pushed his cleaning cart slowly down the hallway, positioning himself near the glass wall of the main lab. From here he could see and hear most of what happened inside while pretending to clean the water fountain. The engineering team gathered around the engine. About 15 people stood in a loose circle, their faces showing various degrees of hope and skepticism. Dr. Westbrook stood at the head of the group, flipping through his folder. "All right, people," he said, his voice carrying through the glass. "I've been reviewing our data all night and I think I've found a new approach. We're going to adjust the computer settings and try a modified startup sequence." A younger engineer raised his hand. "But sir, we've already tried 3 different sequences. The hardware issue is something we can address after we get this thing running." Dr. Westbrook cut him off. "Let's focus on one problem at a time." Miguel ducked his head to hide his smile. They were still looking in the wrong place. The computer settings weren't the issue. Dr. Westbrook closed his folder and straightened his shoulders. "Let's run the diagnostic first, then try the startup." A woman in a white lab coat moved to the computer station and began typing. The large screen on the wall lit up with graphs and numbers. Miguel couldn't read them from where he stood, but he could see the engineers' reactions. Their eyebrows went up. They looked at each other in confusion. "That can't be right," someone said. "Run it again." The woman nodded and restarted the diagnostic. Once again, the screen filled with data. This time there was murmuring among the group. "These readings are perfect," the woman said, sounding puzzled. "Better than our target specs, actually." "That's impossible," Dr. Westbrook said, moving closer to the screen. "Yesterday this thing was a mess. Nothing's changed." "Maybe the computer is malfunctioning," someone suggested. "Or maybe the engine fixed itself overnight," another engineer joked, and a few people laughed nervously. Dr. Westbrook's face hardened. "There's only one way to find out. Let's run the startup sequence." Miguel's heart began to race. This was the moment of truth. He gripped the handle of his mop tightly, his knuckles turning white. The team stepped back, giving Dr. Westbrook space. As he moved to the control panel connected to the engine, he pressed a series of buttons, then placed his hand on a lever. Startup sequence initiating in 3, 2, 1. He pulled the lever down. The room fell silent. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a soft hum filled the air. The engine. Lights blinked on, one by one, changing from red to green. The humming grew stronger, more confident. Instead of the sputtering and grinding sounds that had plagued it for weeks, the engine purred like a content cat. The sound was beautiful, smooth, powerful, and exactly right. Miguel could tell from the pitch alone that the engine was running perfectly. His chest swelled with pride. The engineers stared in disbelief. The woman at the computer gasped as she looked at the readings. It's working perfectly," she said, her voice filled with awe. "All systems optimal. Efficiency ratings at 103% of projected capacity." "That's not possible," Dr. Westbrook whispered. But the proof was right in front of him. A perfectly running engine that yesterday had been on the verge of being scrapped. The room erupted in cheers and applause. People were hugging each other, laughing in relief. Someone popped open a bottle of champagne that had been sitting in the refrigerator for weeks, waiting for this moment. "I don't understand," Dr. Westbrook kept saying, shaking his head. "What changed? What did we do differently?" No one had an answer. They were too busy celebrating to care. The engine that was supposed to revolutionize the industry was finally working, and that was all that mattered. Outside in the hallway, Miguel allowed himself a small smile as he continued mopping. His hands still remembered the feel of that engine, the slight adjustment he'd made to the fuel injection system, the careful realignment of the electrical timing. He'd done good work, Work he could be proud of, even if no one would ever know it was him. "Excuse me, could you mop over there?" one of the engineers called out to him, pointing to a spot where champagne had spilled on the floor. "We're having a little celebration here." "Of course," Miguel said quietly, pushing his cart toward the spill. As he passed the engine, he couldn't resist a quick glance. It sat there running beautifully, its lights glowing green. "Good job," he whispered to it, too softly for anyone to hear. The rest of the day passed in a blur of excitement. Important people in suits visited the lab. Phones rang constantly. Someone ordered pizza for the whole team. Everyone was talking about the investor demonstration on Wednesday and how it would now be a triumphant success rather than a desperate last stand. Through it all, Miguel continued his work, invisible as always. He emptied trash cans overflowing with pizza boxes and champagne bottles. He wiped down tables sticky with soda. He mopped floors tracked with footprints from the constant stream of visitors. When his shift ended, he took one last look at the lab. The engine was still running, now connected to various instruments for long-term testing. It would probably run all night, proving its reliability. As Miguel headed for the bus stop, he felt lighter than he had in years. For one night, he'd been an engineer again. He'd solved a problem that stumped a room full of experts. It didn't matter that they didn't know. He knew. On the bus ride home, Miguel thought about what he would make for dinner tonight. His son had a soccer game this weekend. His daughter needed help with a school project. Life would go on, as it always had. But something had changed. Miguel had remembered who he really was. The next day started like any other for Miguel. He kissed his sleeping children on their foreheads before leaving for work, promised his wife he'd pick up milk on the way home, and caught the early bus that always smelled faintly of French fries. But as he approached the Hartwell Engineering building, he noticed something unusual. There were extra security guards at the entrance. They wore crisp black uniforms and checked everyone's ID badges carefully. Miguel showed his worn janitor's badge like he always did, but today the guard studied it longer than usual before nodding him through. Strange, Miguel thought as he collected his cleaning supplies from the closet. Maybe someone important was visiting today. He started his morning routine on the third floor, away from the main lab where he figured most of the action would be. Around 10 o'clock, Miguel was refilling paper towel dispensers in the men's bathroom when his supervisor, Mr. Lopez, found him. "Miguel, you need to come with me," Mr. Lopez said. His face was serious, and Miguel's stomach dropped. Had they discovered what he'd done? Was he about to lose his job? "Is something wrong?" Miguel asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just come," Mr. Lopez replied, already heading for the door. Miguel followed, his mind racing through possibilities. Maybe the engine had failed after all. Maybe they'd reviewed security footage and seen him working on it. Maybe Frank had confessed to letting him into the lab after hours. Mr. Lopez led him to the elevator and pressed the button for the executive floor, somewhere Miguel only cleaned on weekends when the offices were empty. They rode up in uncomfortable silence. When the doors opened, Miguel was surprised to see Frank the security guard waiting in the hallway. Frank wouldn't meet his eyes. "What's happening?" Miguel asked quietly. "They know," Frank whispered as they passed. "I'm sorry, Miguel. They asked me directly if anyone had accessed the lab after hours." Miguel nodded, his throat tight. He didn't blame Frank. The man had a family too, a pension to protect. Mr. Lopez stopped in front of the main conference room, a grand space with a long table and glass walls overlooking the city. Inside, Miguel could see at least a dozen people seated around the table. Dr. Westbrook was there, along with several other engineers from the hybrid engine team. At the head of the table sat an older woman in an expensive suit, the CEO, Ms. Chandra. Miguel had only seen her from a distance before. Mr. Lopez opened the door and gestured for Miguel to enter. The room fell silent as he stepped inside, still wearing his gray uniform, holding his cleaning rag in his hand. "Mr. Alvarez," Ms. Chen said formally, "please have a seat." Miguel sat in the empty chair at the opposite end of the table from her. He felt small and out of place among these important people. On the wall-mounted screen behind Ms. Chen, He could see paused security footage. His own image was frozen on the screen, bent over the engine in the darkened lab. "Mr. Alvarez," Ms. Chen continued, "we've been reviewing our security footage from 2 nights ago." She pressed a button, and the video began to play. Everyone watched as the recording showed Miguel working on the engine, his movements precise and confident, nothing like the shuffling janitor they saw every day. When the video ended, she turned to him. "Would you care to explain what you were doing with our multi-million-dollar prototype?" The room was completely silent. Miguel could feel the weight of every stare. The engineers who had laughed at him now looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and embarrassment. Dr. Westbrook's face was red, his expression unreadable. Miguel looked down at his weathered hands, the hands that had built and fixed thousands of engines, the hands that had held his children when they were born, the hands that had carried everything he owned across borders when he fled his country. "I fixed it," he said simply. "How?" demanded Dr. Westbrook, leaning forward. "How could you possibly understand a system that my team of PhDs has been struggling with for months?" Miguel took a deep breath. He hadn't told his story in a long time. The memories were both sweet and painful. "Before I came to this country," he began slowly, "I was not a janitor. I was chief mechanical engineer for Rodriguez Motors for 20 years. I designed engine systems that won international competitions. I had my own team, my own lab." He paused, remembering the smell of oil and metal, the sound of engines roaring to life under his care. Then the revolution came. My name was on a list because I had worked on government vehicles. I had to leave in the middle of the night. My family and I escaped with only what we could carry. Miguel looked up, meeting Dr. Westbrook's eyes. "When I came here, my credentials weren't recognized. My accent was too thick. No engineering firm would hire me without local experience or references. But I needed to feed my family, so I took this job." The room was still silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer accusatory but stunned. Miguel reached into his wallet and pulled out a faded, creased business card. He had kept it all these years, a small reminder of who he once was. He slid it across the table. Dr. Westbrook picked it up and read aloud. "Miguel Alvarez, Master Engineer, Doctorate in Mechanical Engineering, University of Madrid." Ms. Chen leaned forward. "If what you're saying is true, why didn't you tell anyone? Why clean floors for 15 years when you have these qualifications?" Miguel shrugged. "I tried in the beginning. No one believed me. After a while, it was easier to be invisible." He gestured toward the frozen image on the screen. "But when I saw your engine struggling, I couldn't help myself. I knew I could fix it." "So those perfect diagnostic readings," Dr. Westbrook said, slowly. "The startup sequence running flawlessly. That was all you?" Miguel nodded. "The fuel injection system had a microscopic misalignment, and the electrical timing mechanism had a small flaw. Simple fixes if you know where to look." One of the younger engineers spoke up. "But how did you diagnose it so quickly when we've been stuck for weeks?" Miguel smiled slightly. "Some problems you can't see on a computer screen. Sometimes you need to feel the machine with your hands, listen to it with your ears. The old ways still work." Ms. Chen was studying him carefully. "Mr. Alvarez, would you be willing to show us exactly what you did to fix the engine?" Miguel straightened in his chair. For the first time in 15 years, someone was asking for his expertise, not his cleaning services. "Yes," he said, his voice stronger now. "I would be happy to show you." Dr. Westbrook cleared his throat. I think we owe you an apology, Mr. Alvarez. I dismissed you without a second thought when you offered to help. We all did." Miguel met his gaze. "You saw what you expected to see, a janitor with a mop, not an engineer with experience." Ms. Chen stood up. "Well, I think it's time we corrected that mistake. Mr. Alvarez, would you follow us to the lab? I believe you have quite a bit to teach us." As they filed out of the conference room, Miguel felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He had been carrying the ghost of his former self for so long, hiding his knowledge and skills. Now, finally, he could step back into the light. The following Monday, Miguel stood nervously outside the main entrance of Hartwell Engineering. He straightened his new blue button-up shirt for the 10th time and adjusted his tie. The clothes felt strange after 15 years in a janitor's uniform. His wife had cried when he tried them on last night. His children had stared at him like he was a stranger. "You look like the pictures from before we came here, Papa," his daughter had said, touching the sleeve of his new shirt with wonder. Now, as employees streamed past him into the building, Miguel took a deep breath and joined them. Instead of heading to the supply closet for his mop and cart, he walked to the security desk for a new ID badge. "Good morning, Mr. Alvarez," said Frank with a wide smile, handing him a shiny badge with Senior Engineering Specialist printed under his name. "First day in the new position?" "Yes," Miguel replied, his voice tight with emotion. "It still doesn't feel real." Frank clapped him on the shoulder. "You earned it. Now go show those fancy engineers how it's really done." The past 5 days had been a whirlwind. After the meeting in the conference room, Miguel had demonstrated to the engineering team exactly what he'd done to fix the hybrid engine. They had watched in silence as his hands moved confidently among the components, explaining each issue and its solution in simple, practical terms. Dr. Westbrook had been the most surprised. "You did all this with a paperclip?" he had asked, examining the makeshift tool Miguel had created. "Sometimes the simplest tools are the best," Miguel had replied. The investor demonstration on Wednesday had been a triumphant success. The engine had performed flawlessly, exceeding all projected metrics. The company had secured full funding for the project, plus additional investment for further development. What no one in the room of wealthy investors knew was that the janitor who had emptied their trash bins was the reason for their excitement, except Ms. Chen knew. And on Thursday morning, she had called Miguel into her office and offered him a position on the engineering team, with a salary that had made him dizzy when he saw the numbers. "This should include back pay for all the expertise we've been wasting," she had said bluntly. "We were fools not to see what was right in front of us." Now, as Miguel stepped off the elevator on the 4th floor, the engineering department, not the janitor's domain, he felt like he was dreaming. People nodded to him as he passed, some looking curious about the new face, others already recognizing him from the meetings over the past few days. Dr. Westbrook was waiting for him at the entrance to the main lab. He looked uncomfortable, shifting, his weight from foot to foot like a child about to apologize for breaking a window. "Mr. Alvarez," he said stiffly, extending his hand. "Welcome to the team. I've assigned you a workspace next to mine. I thought I could learn a thing or two from your approach." Miguel shook his hand. "Thank you, Dr. Westbrook. And please, call me Miguel." "Then you must call me Tom," the man replied, a tentative smile breaking through his usual serious expression. The lab looked different from this angle. Instead of viewing it through glass walls while pushing a mop, Miguel was standing in the center, being introduced as a colleague. The same people who had laughed at him a week ago now listened attentively as he explained his thoughts on the engine's next development phase. At one point, Miguel noticed a young engineer staring at him from across the room. When their eyes met, the young man approached hesitantly. "Sir," he said, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for laughing when you offered to help that day. It was wrong of me." Miguel studied the young man's face. He recognized him as one of those who had snickered the loudest. "We all make mistakes," Miguel said kindly. "The important thing is to learn from them." The young man nodded gratefully and hurried back to his workstation. The morning passed in a blur of introductions and orientation. By lunchtime, Miguel's head was spinning with all the new information. He was about to head to the cafeteria when Ms. Chen appeared at the lab door. "Mr. Alvarez," she called, "I need you for something important." She led him to a large meeting room where about 30 people were already seated. Miguel recognized them as the company's department heads and senior staff. "Everyone," Ms. Chen announced, "this is Miguel Alvarez, our newest engineering specialist and the man who saved the hybrid engine project." There was polite applause. "He's also the reason I've called this meeting." Miguel looked at her in surprise. This hadn't been mentioned to him. Mr. Alvarez was the chief engineer at a major motor company before coming to this country, Ms. Chen continued. But because his credentials weren't recognized here, he spent the last 15 years cleaning our floors instead of designing our engines. She looked around the room. How many other brilliant minds are we wasting because we can't see past our own prejudices? The room was silent. Today, Ms. Chen said firmly, we're implementing a new company policy. From now on, all positions will require skills-based assessments, regardless of where someone's credentials come from. We're also creating a scholarship fund for immigrant engineers needing to re-establish their credentials in this country. She turned to Miguel. With your permission, we'd like to call it the Alvarez Initiative. Miguel felt a lump in his throat. He thought of all the people he'd known, doctors driving taxis, scientists washing dishes, professors delivering packages, because their knowledge wasn't valued here. I would be honored, he managed to say. Later that afternoon, Miguel found himself alone in the lab with the hybrid engine. Everyone else had gone to a department meeting that didn't yet involve him. He walked around the machine slowly, admiring its elegant design. When he'd first fixed it, he'd been focused on the problems. Now he could appreciate it as the revolutionary creation it was. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. How was your first day? Miguel smiled and typed back, like coming home after a very long journey. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and noticed something on the workbench nearby. His old janitor's uniform, neatly folded. On top of it sat a note in Dr. Westbrook's handwriting. To remind us never to judge a book by its cover. Miguel picked up the uniform. It had been his identity for so long that part of him was sad to let it go. But as he set it back down, he felt lighter somehow. Free. In the hallway outside, he could hear the cleaning cart that had once been his. The wheels still squeaked slightly. He made a mental note to show the new janitor how to oil them properly. Some lessons could only be learned from experience, no matter what degrees you had. That was something Miguel understood better than most. And now, finally, he would have the chance to share everything he knew.